For nearly 50 years, the secret of what really went down behind the scenes of Good Times stayed in the closet. But now, Jimmie Walker has finally spilled a bombshell about his co-star, Esther Rolle, and it's something fans never saw coming. The on-screen chemistry between TV's most beloved mother and son wasn't totally rosy behind the scenes. What was behind the story? Was there tension? Jealousy? Maybe even betrayal? Walker's confession has reignited interest in the popular show, leaving viewers shocked and wanting more. The quiet years have come to an end, and the truth could alter the way we look at Good Times forever. Now that the quiet has been turned upside down, there's still one thing that remains. Were the rumors we've heard over the years just blown out of proportion, or was something real being kept under wraps? Let's get up close and personal. Facts or myths? For almost half a century, individuals have been discussing, not on magazine covers or talk shows, but on comment threads, fan sites, and those old TV Facebook groups where classic shows never truly perish. And one of the most enduring myths that always was brought up was that Jimmie Walker and Esther Rolle never got along. Some claimed to detest one another. Others claimed they hardly spoke unless the cameras were on. On Reddit, a user commented, "Esther Rolle never made it a secret her disdain for Jimmie Walker." The statement alone started hundreds of responses, each attempting to reconstruct what actually happened. On sitcoms online, fans were still arguing decades after. One commenter stated, "I'm surprised they let their beef and put it out there because there was no way they were going to best Jimmie Walker in a fight with the Good Times fan base then. He was the bread and butter of that show." And on Lipstick Alley, where one posting included behind-the-scenes gossip from Jimmie Walker's own memoir, disclosing evidence of an irrevocable schism, one commenter said, "Jimmie felt like he was a punching bag, particularly after being publicly berated in interviews. It didn't hurt that fans said they saw it on television. Whenever JJ made a joke or spoke his catchphrase, dynamite, some swore you could detect Esther Rolle bristle up, lean in her seat, or get quiet for a second too long. These weren't over-the-top blow-ups. They were little, actual moments that grew bigger with time. The longer the silence, the louder the gossip. People began making assumptions. Was it ego? Was somebody feeling disrespected? All this leads to today. Jimmie Walker is 78 now, and after all the speculation, all the give and take on the web, he's finally speaking out for himself. And what he had to say might solve one of the longest-standing mysteries in the history of television's classics. What does it all look like to him today? Let's hear it from the horse's mouth. At this stage of his life, Jimmie Walker has nothing to prove, and he just spoke about what happened in his perspective. When they asked him about Esther Rolle, he never sidestepped the question. He told it bluntly. "We were never friends. We never spoke. Only on set. I wouldn't even have her number. We never did anything together." This is the very sentence that is quite interesting. The whole distance between two individuals who pretended mother and son on national TV. Why don't they have each other's contact? For audiences who came of age with Good Times, this sort of thing gets to you. On television, the Evans appeared to be a real family. But off camera, it was a different world. There was tension, there was distance, and occasionally, there was nothing but silence. Now this is where things begin to crack. Behind all the laughter, something was cracking. While America was falling in love with the Evans family, a whispered battle was simmering. Esther Rolle and John Amos were not merely acting. They were battling to keep the show honest. They wanted honest tales of struggle, family, dignity. But while Esther and John insisted upon that, something else was occurring. Jimmie Walker's character, JJ, started to blow up. The crowd loved him, his jokes, and his style. The dynamite catchphrase took off like wildfire. Then the network capitalized on the show's popularity, leading to a shift in tone and focus. Suddenly, it was more about punchlines than real problems. More laughs, less truth. And for some cast members, that didn't sit right. To some, it was entertaining. To others, it seemed as though the heart of the show was escaping. Jimmie never struggled with that change. He was performing what he was told to do, and he was doing it well. But that also made him the face of something his co-stars did not believe in. And that bred space. You could sense it, even if no one discussed it at the time. And now, all these years later, Jimmie's telling them they were never actually friends. But it wasn't due to a huge argument, No, they never did. They were simply two people who differed greatly attempting to do the same job, but do it differently. So now that we have a handle on how far apart things actually were, the question is why? What drew them so far apart, even after the cameras stopped rolling? The real source of the tension, the true tension on Good Times, didn't begin with Jimmie Walker. It began with what his character became. You see, Esther Rolle didn't despise Jimmie. That was never the problem. In fact, she let it be known in an interview. He's 18 and he doesn't work. He can't read or write. He doesn't think. The show didn't start out to be that. Gradually, with the assistance of the artist, I presume, since they couldn't do that to me, they've made JJ dumber and expanded the role. Negative images have been inserted on us through the oldest child character. From that line, it's clear the issue wasn't the actor. It was the role. Esther had a vision for the show. To her, Good Times was meant to show the real lives of black families in America, in particular those who were working class and struggled yet remained dignified. There was room for comedy, certainly. But when JJ became a cartoon character full-blown with loud outfits, catchphrases, and crazy behavior, she felt the show was going down a bad path. It was no longer telling the truth. It was simply describing comedy and fun. John Amos shared that sentiment. Prior to Good Times, he was most well known as the adult Kunta Kinte in Roots. A classically trained actor with a serious take on storytelling, he portrayed James Evans, the stern but caring dad on the show. Like Esther, he thought that Good Times needed to be about something. He told them the writers would rather place a chicken hat on JJ and have him strut around going dynamite, and then they could blow a few minutes and not have to come up with meaningful dialogue. It was more like the farther the writers leaned towards the silly aspect, the more out of touch he felt. The more popular JJ became, the more the writers started framing shows around him. The series began leaning in a direction that had less space for the parents, particularly the deeper, more intense storylines Esther was a believer in. This was not sitting well with Esther. She didn't work on a clown show. And you know how it is. Fans and audiences never disappoint. They caught the tension quickly, but the press wasn't always reliable. A number of articles and magazines quoted Esther inaccurately over the years. One of the headlines gave the impression that she couldn't tolerate Jimmie Walker. Again, however, her statement was explicit. She respected him as an actor. She disapproved of the way the character of JJ monopolized the message of the show. Norman Lear, the creator of the show, also had something to say afterwards. He acknowledged he had expected Rolle and Amos to be more open to Jimmie. Lear felt that their coolness drove Jimmie deeper into himself. He closed up. Rather than being released, things remained quiet, but not so much in a peaceful manner. Nobody pitched tantrums or whatever, but silence between shots spoke volumes. They worked together, but they didn't connect. They arrived, got the job done, and left. Not enemies and not quite friends either. Jimmie, meanwhile, remained professional about the work. He wasn't oblivious to what was going on. He sensed the distance, but he remained true to the script, gave the producers what they needed, and attempted not to ruffle feathers. He was merely a young actor doing what the producers directed him to do. He played the character as written and remained out of the way. What complicates the entire tale is that both sides were equally right. Jimmie was a star. He brought life to the show. His timing was good, and audience members enjoyed him. But Esther and John wanted to defend something larger, the integrity of the way black life was represented on television. To them, this was a matter of more than just comedy. It was cultural turf they didn't want to sacrifice. So the battle wasn't about egos. It was about mission. One wanted to preserve the essence of the show. The other got caught up in what the network was selling. And when nobody found common ground, the split hardened. This wasn't a personal rivalry. It was a creative gap that never got bridged. But as the cameras continued to roll and the ratings remained high, something was quietly changing in the background. The tension wasn't palpable yet, but you could sense that it was there. And soon, it would become so intense that nobody could just ignore it anymore. Escalation and exit when everything changed. Behind-the-scenes things on the Good Times set weren't as rosy as they appeared on television. Laughs were genuine, But things were beginning to change behind the scenes. The actor who portrayed James Evans, John Amos, felt as if the series was diverging from what it was meant to be. In a 2021 interview with Essence, Amos recounted, "I quit because I was informed that my services were no longer desired because I'd become a disruptive factor." He described how he constantly clashed with the writers, who, in his opinion, didn't grasp the realities of Black working-class life. "It was tooth and nail over what we felt was right. And our beliefs were based on the experience," he said. "They were speculating what my response or the character's response would be based on a Beverly Hills perspective. The producers didn't like that, and by season 3's end, Amos was no more. They did a write-off of James Evans in a car accident. In the same way, one of the series' greatest characters was lost. Florida Evans, played by Esther Rolle, wasn't pleased either. She was already uneasy with the way the show had begun to center around JJ's antics, rather than the family's values. She felt it was getting dumber than smart. In an interview, she said, "There's too much clowning on the show, and it's becoming meaningless. I believe that the show does not possess truth, honesty, and sincerity, and does not have the quality that it did when we began." She also departed after season 4. The producers had capitalized on JJ's popularity. Viewers enjoyed his catchphrases and crazed energy, and the network noticed ratings increase. But the soul of the show, the deep and emotional center, was dying quickly. Esther Rolle returned in season 6, but only after renegotiating for higher compensation and greater control over the show's direction. One of her demands was that JJ become a more mature character. She wanted the show to go back to its original function. But by then the vibe on set had changed, and everybody could sense it. Without John Amos, and with Esther Rolle returning under new conditions, the original fire of Good Times was lost. The family dynamic was not the same, and for many longtime viewers, the show had lost the element that made it so powerful. Critics began to notice it too. What was once a pioneering series about a close-knit Black family had become a vehicle for one-liners and catchphrases. The comedic and truthful scales were off. Eventually, the departure of John Amos and Esther Rolle weren't just cast shakeups. They became a metaphor, a testament to how quickly something worthwhile can be brushed aside for the sake of entertainment. There's one point in season 4 when Florida, Esther Rolle, discovers James, John Amos, is deceased. She is standing in the kitchen, holding a shattered plate, and yelling, "Damn, damn, damn." Until today, folks still discuss that scene. Not because it's dramatic, but because it felt real.